Why did you get into politics as heavy as you've gotten into them now?
Miss Ellison, ninth grade, high school civics. It ain't difficult. My grandmother was very, politically involved, meaning she voted, she participated in, Democratic campaigns and things of that nature. I was taught to organize by Reverend James Orange. You people out there can Google that. He was one of the characters you saw in Selma, but he was a person who was a lieutenant with Dr. King. He organized voter registrations. He organized within the labor movement, So I understood politics was important. I grew up in Atlanta, where prior to 1972, there had never been a black mayor. So I grew up only knowing black mayors my whole life. One in particular was Maynard Jackson. And he was incredibly good for the black people and Atlanta, period, for the business community. So I've understood from a very young age how politics directly affected my life. And then if you pay attention to high school civics, it's pretty cool. It really is. That you are in a republic that has principles of democracy that allow you to participate in government is pretty cool. And if you're a part of a minority or a person who's been denied those rights, I think you should pay particular interest in it, because you can, instead of becoming a victim that complains, you can become a Fred Hampton, someone that's an advocate on the behalf of the proletariat.
Absolutely. Now, you've actually compared Bernie Sanders to Martin Luther King.
I've compared Bernie Sanders' policy to Martin Luther King's philosophy of what a socially just society should be. I'm wary of comparing human beings to one another, because then you leave room for stupidity for other human beings to say, well, this human being can't be this human being. You're right, because human beings are unique, and that's stupid for you to assume. But in terms of philosophy and policy, the philosophy of Dr. King was a philosophy of one of social justice, human rights, and constitutional rights for blacks in America. Not just blacks, though. After he acquired civil rights for black people, he went on to understand that the same systems that denied black people their civil rights are the same systems that propagate war in foreign lands on black and brown people, the same systems that have unfair banking practices, the same systems that denied home loans and GI Bills to black soldiers and citizens after World War II, the same systems that keep poor white people in the Appalachians on the ground, the same systems that use Asian people as railroad slaves, essentially. He realized that those systems are interconnected, and it's not just based on color, but that our caste system in this country was based on class. And he tried his best to help other people understand that. He died broke, friendless, working on a poor people's campaign in Memphis on the behalf of sanitation workers in Memphis, be they black or white. Bernie Sanders' policy addresses the exact same things. And beyond that, the labor movement goes back over 100 years in this country. Over 100 years. If you look at Eugene Debs, for instance, he was fighting for your 8-hour workday 100 years ago. Now that you have an 8-hour workday and you think, hey, it's good enough, you gotta realize that you got 100 years on that. It probably should be time to ask for more. It probably should be time to ask for a 40-hour week in which you can live off. It probably should be time to ask for a full 4 weeks vacation. It probably should be time for 12 weeks maternity leave for women, because for 100 years you lived in this current system, and it's not good enough. It can be better. So for me, based on the sociology and the philosophy of King, I support Bernie Sanders' policy. But what I don't do for people on the other side of this camera is compare human beings as though they're martyrs to be compared to Jesus-like people, because no one can ever be that. No one can ever do what Dr. King did for us. He died for all of us, but their policy can be in line with his philosophy.
Well, people have said that Bernie Sanders is a socialist. Would you agree with that?
I think he has said he's a social democrat. And I think Dr. King said the same thing, he's a social democrat. And I think that people who are afraid of socialism, communism, capitalism, whatever ism they are, need to understand that, yeah, all these systems have been pretty fucked up. With that said, the proletariat has always survived under them. There are people that are unsatisfied in Russia, there are people that are unsatisfied in Europe, and there are people that are unsatisfied in America. So either you, A, wake up and kill your masters, and start a whole new thing based on an anarchist philosophy, Or you make these systems be more fair towards you. So if you're Cuba and you're a socialist or a communist country for real, what you start doing is introducing capitalism to your system so that you can flourish. But if you're a purely capitalist country, like Canada was, what you start doing is introducing some tenements of socialism so that you still can have millionaires, but poor people still have basic health care. Again, if you're thinking, you'll just take a trip to Canada and say, what's this socialism thing look like? And you'll see you're not living with a green jacket and a red star on you. You'll see that your friends who live there can go to the emergency room and not have to worry about being in debt for the next 10 years. And I think that as Americans, you'll come to a logical place where you say we can cater our own version of this without the current confusion that's going on around healthcare and stuff like that. I think that when Americans say we need to keep our country great, we don't need to be socialists, they need to understand that your children are the only children in the world who are not bilingual. All those socialist countries that you're saying are weak or that you don't want to be like, their children are already smarter than you. They're already testing higher than your children. So the fact that you have a presidential candidate that wants to give you another free 4 years of school could be to your benefit, because on the world market, Americans are not very competitive in matters of education, simply because the base bottom poor kids and the middle class kids and working class kids that are in public school are not getting the quality of education they deserve. Meanwhile, rich people who live in our society, and when I say rich, I mean my youngest daughter is going to private school, and I'm by no means a billionaire, but my youngest daughter can go to private school. So with my vote, I'm voting against my best interests because I would like for your children to be able to get the type of education that I'm finally able to give to my children.
Well, I came from Russia. I was born there. My family grew up there.
I know that.
I recently went back there to visit, and you could still feel communism in the air. And I can tell you, like, my family told me what a full-blown communism system is like.
Not good.
It's not very pretty. It's not very pretty. So I think people saying that they have some concerns about a presidential candidate being socialist, they worry about us going towards that direction.
But again,
not a good direction.
He's not a socialist. He's a democratic socialist. So even for you to repeat, again, he's a socialist, propagates a propaganda that's not true. He's a democratic socialist. And the difference between a democratic socialist and a socialist is a socialist believes everything that we're making should belong to the state, or communists should be divvied back up between us evenly. That didn't work. You know what else didn't work? Pure capitalism has never worked. Pure capitalism led to a small thing called slavery, because it's easy to use cheap labor to create goods that you can then sell at 1,000 times more than it's worth. So in matters of pure capitalism, should I go get Africans, pay them a fair trade, allow them to become an equal class of people here in this country to be co-ran, or should I kidnap them, murder them, do barbarian-like things to get them to work for free to give my young country a 400-year jump that Europe has had a 4,000-year jump on us? So how is either more compassionate than the other? Just because one happened in the 20th century and one didn't?
It's an interesting point. It's definitely an interesting point.
Now, what has worked is when human beings are allowed in this republic to think the process through. Prior to the end of slavery, there was no such thing as public schools. After slavery ended, around 1865, 1870, what happened was black people said, hey man, if nothing else, you owe us an education. The United States government says they say we do owe you an education. We kept you in bondage. But if we're gonna educate those black children, we gotta educate all children. So what ended up happening is all children in America got a socialist program called public schools based on the people that they had held in bondage under capitalism finally becoming free and deserving an education. So all of us have benefited from socialism in that way. You work an 8-hour workday today because of the socialist and anarchist movements of labor in the late 1800s and early 1900s. No capitalist decided, wow, and I'm a compassionate capitalist. The barbers who work in this shop pay me my money or they don't have a job. So I understand the tenements of capitalism. But with that said, if your kid gets a haircut here, we give them a free Hot Wheel. So I know compassionate capitalism. But if pure capitalists would have ran your country, you'd be working 15-hour days, your children would be working 18-hour days, and you'd be making $3. I read as much Thomas Sowell as anybody else. I know who Milton Friedman is too. And what I'm saying is, in no way were Lenin and Marx perfectly right. In no way is a pure capitalist system perfectly right. Human beings have to trust each other to be intelligent enough to grow and evolve our philosophy. Another tenet of socialism is free lunch. A lot of children would not be getting free breakfast and or lunch in school if it had not been for the Black Panthers, a socialist organization who fed children breakfast for free. You know, there's an African proverb that says many hands make for light work. So I don't think any white man, meaning Western European governments, has come up with the perfect system. I don't think communism, socialism, or pure capitalism have ever worked. What I think works is when human beings figure out how to better tailor systems to cover the basic needs of all human beings. That's it.
So Russell Simmons came out publicly and endorses Hillary Clinton. And one of the things that he said is, quote, "I think Bernie Sanders is overpromising. He's insensitive to the plight of black people."
I respectfully disagree.
Why is that?
Anyone who's worked on the behalf of black people in terms of philosophy and policy for 51 years, I think is firmly understands. Any man who chained himself to black women doing segregation to protest it. Any man who stood on the floor of the House and said that a bill he did compromise to is wrong because it's going to unfairly target black kids and Latino kids. Any person that tweets out a year ago that they will restore the Voters' Rights Act, which all my black leaders were pretty quiet about, to be very honest with you. None of us have raised enough, hoorah about that. Any person who has done that over decades has shown me a consistency and a will to be an ally to my people that I have to trust. Now, I don't know what Russell is thinking. I don't know what Russell sees as the agenda or overarching agenda for African Americans, but for me, I respectfully disagree with one of my idols who happens to be Russell Simmons.
Well, historically, black people have voted for the Clintons.
Yeah, historically, black people have voted for Bill Clinton. And I think that in retrospect, you can see that's a mistake. If you read Michelle Alexander's book, the new Jim Crow, you understand that more African-American men have been locked up for nonviolent drug offenses. You understand that essentially Bill Clinton proving to the Republican Party that he was hard on crime turned his crime policy into Republican light. You have mandatory minimum sentences. You have 100-to-1 crack to cocaine sentencing disparities and ratios and disparities. I think that it was utterly damaging to the black community. When you look at the welfare to work program that was propagated by him in 1996, that program now, first of all, you target with a drug law that targets black men, right? It makes it profitable almost to hunt black men because federal money starts to come down for drug programs, right? So now you've taken a male presence out of a community. Forget out of the house, out of the community. Now you have mothers in a community, village raising these children, and you tell them, in spite of the hardships, in spite of the fact that my great economy doesn't get past the black middle class, you gotta go to work. You got to prove that you need this $215 we're giving you. So now you're on a bus, you're going 20 to 30 to 40 miles away. Now your child, boy or girl, is left unattended. How does homework get done? How are children properly fed? That proved to be an utter failure. The black woman that they walked around with touting that somehow her life had gotten better because she had all of a sudden been forced to work, ended up losing her son to the streets and to drugs. Ended up saying at the end, this program, it really wasn't as helpful to me. So they've shown themselves in terms of policy not to be the best thing for African Americans. I would still love them to come to our church. I would still love, saxophones to be played. I would still love for us to like them as human beings, but I don't think that their policy or their history or his history or that policy is one that black people should be voting for again. I think it was terribly destructive in my community, and I think that we should use better reasoning and logic.
What do you think about Hillary Clinton's super predator comments?
I thought they were grotesquely evil to say then. I'm happy to hear that she's apologized for them. And I think that to characterize a child 20 years ago as a super predator and to 20 years after that see black children being hunted and killed in the streets by policemen, I think that you have to do like Minister Farrakhan said, he helped to create an atmosphere in which it was acceptable for that to happen. I thought that was one of the greatest apologies I've ever heard because people wanted you to say, it's your fault. But it's a grander thing in creating an atmosphere. It's a more adamant and honest and open apology. I, as a man, have to accept that my chauvinism creates an atmosphere in which it's safe to say a dirty joke around me. And I had to grow out of that. You know, I, as a straight man, had to understand that me using words out of context that were wrong creates an atmosphere that creates a situation where it's easy to abuse gay people. You have to accept that responsibility. So my thing is that statement created an atmosphere, added to an atmosphere of black males as evil, black males as animals, black males as something that needed to be healed, something that needed to be controlled like a wild, vicious animal. And it leads you to a Trayvon Martin being able to be murdered by a vigilante. It leads you to a Samir Rice. It leads you to police not being empathetic to your children. And I think that beyond the I'm sorry for saying that, you have to understand the power of the words you have when you are one of the most powerful people in the world. And I don't know if Mrs. Clinton understands that. I hope she does, because I would like for other middle-class people, both white and black, to understand the danger that you put children in when you choose to classify them as simply criminals based on an action that is the result of poverty. That is the result of being ignored by systems. That is the result of poor education. That is the result of us snatching parents out of the home. You know, these are the results we get. So I think all of us share culpability, but that statement has a direct line from it to the current situation of children being able to be murdered, I think.
Have you ever met Khloe Kardashian?
Yeah, no, she's a lovely girl.
Yeah. There was a rumor that the two of you hooked up.
Is it?
Yeah.
Fucking no, I wish I knew about that.
Nah, it's not true?
Nah.
It was supposed to be in Australia.
I don't know if God is a man or a woman, but I definitely know that bitch is the devil. For sure.
Why so?
Why so? She destroyed lives.